Sometimes, the most valuable thing a person can offer isn't money, power, or status. It's a warm meal served with a sincere heart. The rain fell steadily across the long driveway as Emily Carter stood at the edge of an iron gate that seemed taller than anything she had ever encountered. Her light blue jacket was damp from the weather, and her worn sneakers were spotted with rainwater, but she barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on the sprawling mansion beyond the gate, a place so grand it looked more like a luxury resort than a private home. She tightened her grip on the small canvas bag hanging from her shoulder and glanced down at the folded piece of paper in her hand. The address matched. This was the place. For a brief moment, she considered turning around and leaving. People like her didn't belong in places like this. At least, that was what life had taught her. Emily was 32 years old, a single mother raising her 8-year-old daughter, Lily, in a small apartment across town. Every dollar she earned seemed to disappear the moment it arrived. Rent, groceries, school supplies, utility bills, there was always something waiting. Yet no matter how difficult things became, she never allowed herself to complain. Lily depended on her, and that responsibility gave her strength even on the hardest days. Earlier that morning, Emily had found an online listing seeking temporary kitchen help for a private residence. The pay was higher than anything she had seen in months. She almost ignored it, assuming hundreds of applicants would be more qualified. But something inside her urged her to try. Now, standing in the rain, she wondered if that hope had been foolish. A security guard approached from a small booth near the gate and looked her over. "Can I help you?" he asked politely. Emily swallowed and nodded. "I'm here about the kitchen position." The guard checked a list, then pressed a button. The massive gate slowly opened. Emily blinked in surprise. She had expected rejection. Instead, she found herself walking forward. The driveway stretched nearly a quarter-mile before reaching the front entrance. As she approached the mansion, she noticed the warm glow, shining through enormous windows. The house looked beautiful, but strangely quiet. Not joyful, not welcoming, just quiet. The front door opened before she reached it. A woman dressed in a professional black suit greeted her. "You're Emily Carter?" she asked. Emily nodded. "Follow me." Inside, everything felt larger than life. Marble floors, towering ceilings, priceless artwork. Yet despite the luxury, Emily sensed something unusual. The house felt empty, as though it had forgotten what laughter sounded like. She followed the woman through several hallways until they stopped outside a large study. The woman opened the door. "Mr. Anderson will see you now." Emily took a slow breath. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Then she stepped inside. Sitting near the window was William Anderson, one of the most successful billionaires in America. He looked up from a document and studied her silently. The room seemed to freeze. Emily lowered her eyes and spoke the only honest words she could think of. "I don't have much to offer, sir," she said softly. "But I can cook." William's expression changed ever so slightly. Then he set down the paper and replied with a question that would change everything. "Can you prove it?" Emily blinked, surprised by the question. She had expected an interview, perhaps a discussion about experience or references, but not a challenge. Still, she nodded. "Yes, sir," she answered quietly. William Anderson stood from his chair and motioned toward the door. Without another word, he led her down a hallway and into a kitchen larger than her entire apartment. Stainless steel appliances gleamed beneath warm lights. Shelves were stocked with ingredients from around the world. Emily felt completely out of place. Several staff members glanced in her direction. Some appeared curious. Others seemed doubtful. One man wearing a chef's coat folded his arms and looked away with a faint expression of disapproval. William noticed none of it, or perhaps he simply did not care. "You have 1 hour," he said. "Cook whatever you believe represents you best." Emily looked around the room. There were countless expensive ingredients available, but her eyes settled on simple items: fresh vegetables, chicken stock, herbs, potatoes. She smiled faintly. The ingredients reminded her of home. After William left the kitchen, Emily rolled up her sleeves and began working. Her movements were calm and practiced. She was not trying to impress anyone with complicated techniques. She simply cooked the way her mother had taught her years ago. Every slice, every stir, every seasoning carried memories. The staff occasionally glanced her way. One assistant whispered something to another employee. The chef in the white coat shook his head as if already convinced she would fail. Emily ignored them. She had spent years being underestimated. There was no energy left for proving strangers wrong. Instead, she focused on creating something honest. Outside, the rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Inside, a different kind of warmth slowly filled the room. The aroma of simmering vegetables and herbs drifted through the air. Employees passing through the kitchen began slowing their pace. Some paused altogether. One housekeeper stopped near the doorway and smiled. "That smells wonderful," she said quietly before continuing on her way. Nearly an hour later, Emily placed a simple bowl of soup on a tray. It was not fancy. There were no elaborate garnishes, no expensive presentation, just a meal prepared with care. When William returned, the kitchen fell silent. He approached the counter and looked at the bowl for several seconds. The chef standing nearby seemed ready to criticize it before the billionaire even tasted it. William lifted a spoon and took a bite. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he froze. His eyes remained fixed on the soup. The room grew so quiet that Emily could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator behind her. William slowly lowered the spoon. Something had changed in his expression. The guarded distance she had seen earlier was suddenly gone. In its place appeared something deeper, something almost painful. He looked down at the bowl once more, then out the nearby window where rain streaked across the glass. Finally, he spoke in a voice softer than before. "Where did you learn to make this?" Emily hesitated. "From my mother," she replied. William stared at her for another long moment. Then, for reasons Emily could not possibly understand, the billionaire looked as though he had just been transported back to a memory he had spent years trying to forget. Emily noticed the change in William's face immediately. Only minutes earlier, he had seemed distant, controlled, almost impossible to read. Now he looked like a man standing between the present and a memory that refused to let go. The kitchen staff exchanged curious glances, but nobody spoke. William set the spoon down carefully and looked at the bowl again. "My wife used to make something very similar," he said at last. His voice remained calm, yet there was a weight behind the words that filled the room. Emily lowered her eyes respectfully. "She must have been a wonderful cook," she replied. William gave a faint smile, the first genuine expression she had seen from him. She was. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then William surprised everyone. He picked up the spoon and took another bite. And then another. The chef standing nearby shifted uncomfortably. Clearly, he had expected criticism, not appreciation. When the bowl was nearly empty, William looked toward the staff member who had escorted Emily into the mansion. "Please prepare the guest suite." The woman blinked. "For how long, sir?" William turned back toward Emily. "That depends on whether Miss Carter is willing to stay." Emily felt her heart skip. "Stay," she repeated. "I only applied for temporary work." "I know," William answered. "But I would like you to cook here for a while." The chef immediately stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, we already have a professional kitchen team." William did not raise his voice. He simply looked at the man. "And yet this is the first meal in years that I have actually finished." The room fell silent again. Emily felt dozens of eyes turned toward her. She was suddenly very aware of her damp jacket, her inexpensive clothes, and the fact that she did not belong among these people. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I have a daughter at home. I cannot stay overnight." William nodded. "Then we will arrange a schedule that works for you." Emily did not know what to say. Opportunities like this did not happen to people like her. At least that was what she had always believed. Before she could answer, her phone vibrated inside her pocket. She quickly glanced at the screen. It was a text message from Lily's babysitter. Emily's stomach tightened. The message explained that Lily had developed a slight fever after school and was resting on the couch. Concern immediately replaced every other thought in her mind. William noticed her expression change. "Is everything all right?" he asked. Emily hesitated before answering. "My daughter is not feeling well." Without hesitation, William said, "You should go to her." The response caught her off guard. Most employers would have focused on the job. Instead, he seemed genuinely concerned. Emily nodded gratefully. As she gathered her bag, William spoke again. "Miss Carter." She stopped and turned. "Would you be willing to return tomorrow?" Emily looked at the billionaire, then at the nearly empty bowl of soup sitting on the counter. Something told her that today had been far more important than a simple job interview. "Yes," she answered softly. "I will be here." As she walked toward the front entrance, she did not notice William watching her leave, nor did she hear the quiet question forming in his mind. How could a stranger's cooking bring back memories he thought were gone forever? The drive home felt different that evening. The rain had stopped, but Emily's thoughts continued racing long after she left the mansion behind. She parked outside her apartment building just after sunset and hurried upstairs. The moment she opened the door, Lily ran toward her and wrapped her arms around her waist. "Mom," she said with a smile. The sight instantly eased the worry Emily had carried all afternoon. She placed her hand gently against Lily's forehead. The fever seemed lower. "How are you feeling?" Emily asked. "Better," Lily replied. "Mrs. Jenkins gave me soup." Emily laughed softly. "Then I owe Mrs. Jenkins a thank you." Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Emily sat alone at the small kitchen table. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Bills were stacked neatly beside her. Rent was due in less than 2 weeks. The electric bill sat unopened. She stared at the numbers and rubbed her temples. Then her phone buzzed. It was a message from the mansion. Her schedule for the next day had already been arranged. Transportation would be available if needed. The pay rate listed at the bottom of the message made her read it twice. It was more than she could earn in several days at her current part-time jobs. Emily set the phone down slowly. For the first time in months, a small feeling of hope appeared. Across town, William Anderson sat alone in his study. The mansion was as quiet as ever. A fire crackled softly in the fireplace, yet the room still felt cold. On a nearby shelf stood a framed photograph. William picked it up and studied the smiling woman in the picture. Her name was Claire. Years had passed since her death, but some evenings felt as though no time had moved at all. He remembered family dinners, long conversations, laughter filling rooms that now stood empty. Then he remembered the bowl of soup from earlier that day. The memory was so vivid, he could almost smell it again. It was not the ingredients that affected him. It was the feeling, the sense of home, the sense of being cared for without expectation. That was what had unsettled him. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. His longtime house manager entered. "Sir, is everything satisfactory with the new hire?" William looked toward the window. "She is different." "Different how?" the woman asked. William considered the question. Most people who entered his world wanted something. A business deal, an investment, an introduction, a favor. Emily Carter had asked for nothing. She had simply cooked. "She reminds me that not everything valuable comes with a price tag," he said quietly. The next morning arrived bright and clear. Emily woke before sunrise, prepared breakfast for Lily, and dropped her off at school. As she approached the mansion again, she felt less intimidated than before. Nervous, yes, but determined as well. She had no idea that several members of the household staff were already discussing her arrival. Some were curious, others were skeptical, and one person in particular had already decided she did not belong there. As Emily stepped through the front doors, she sensed none of it. She believed she was returning to a kitchen job. She did not realize she was walking into a chapter of her life that would test her heart, reveal her past, and quietly begin changing the future of everyone inside that mansion. Emily spent the morning doing exactly what she always did whenever she felt uncertain. She worked. The kitchen quickly became her refuge. Measuring ingredients, preparing vegetables, and organizing recipes gave her mind something productive to focus on. Yet she could not ignore the subtle tension around her. The head chef, Richard Bennett, watched her closely from the moment she arrived. He was an accomplished professional who had managed the mansion's kitchen for years, and he clearly did not appreciate William's sudden interest in someone with no formal culinary credentials. Whenever Emily offered assistance, Richard responded politely but coldly. Whenever she completed a task, he inspected it as though searching for mistakes. Emily chose not to take it personally. Life had taught her that some people needed time before offering trust. Near noon, William entered the kitchen unexpectedly. Several employees immediately straightened their posture. Richard stepped forward and began explaining the day's menu, but William's attention drifted elsewhere. He noticed Emily arranging fresh herbs near the counter. "Good morning, Miss Carter," he said. Emily looked up and smiled. "Good morning, sir." The simple exchange surprised everyone. William rarely engaged in casual conversation with staff members. "How is your daughter feeling today?" he asked. Emily blinked. She had not expected him to remember. "Much better. Thank you for asking." William nodded before leaving for a meeting. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet several employees exchanged curious glances once he was gone. Richard's expression tightened slightly. Later that afternoon, Emily prepared lunch for a small group of executives visiting the estate. She worked alongside the kitchen team and followed every instruction carefully. When the meal concluded, one of the visitors stopped by the kitchen before departing. "Who prepared the roasted vegetables?" he asked. Richard hesitated. Emily quietly raised her hand. "I did." The man smiled. "They reminded me of meals my grandmother used to make." "Thank you." After he left, Emily returned to work without another word. She did not notice William standing at the far end of the hallway. He had witnessed the entire exchange. What fascinated him was not the compliment itself. It was Emily's reaction. She did not appear proud. She did not seek recognition. She simply continued working. That evening, William found himself lingering in the kitchen longer than necessary. He watched as Emily packed leftovers into containers. "You take food home?" he asked. Emily nodded. "Nothing goes to waste in my house." William smiled faintly. "Your daughter must enjoy that." Emily laughed softly. "She thinks I am the greatest cook in America." "And is she wrong?" William asked. The unexpected joke caught Emily off guard. For the first time, she saw a glimpse of the man beneath the billionaire reputation. Not the executive from magazine covers. Not the business leader. Just a man capable of warmth. As she gathered her things to leave, William noticed a worn photograph partially visible inside her bag. A younger Emily stood beside an older woman in front of a modest house. "Your mother?" he asked. Emily looked at the photograph and gently touched the corner. "Yes," she answered. "Everything I know about cooking came from her." William studied the picture for a moment. Then he looked back at Emily. "Tell me about her sometime." Emily smiled politely, unaware that a conversation about her past was about to uncover far more than either of them expected. The following afternoon, William found Emily alone in a small breakfast room overlooking the gardens. She had finished preparing a tray of sandwiches for a meeting and was organizing recipes she planned to use later that week. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, giving the room a warmth that felt unusual inside the often quiet mansion. William carried a cup of coffee and paused near the doorway. "You promised to tell me about your mother someday," he said. Emily smiled faintly. "I suppose I did." He took a seat across from her. For a moment, Emily stared at the recipe card in her hands. The edges were worn from years of use. "My mother never went to culinary school," she began. "She never owned a restaurant. Most people would not have considered her special." William listened without interrupting. "But she could take almost nothing and turn it into a meal that made people feel loved." Emily laughed softly. "When money was tight, she somehow made dinner feel like a holiday. I never understood how she did it." William glanced at the recipe card. Maybe because it was never really about the food. Emily looked up. Exactly. For the first time, someone seemed to understand what she meant. She told him about growing up in a small town, about helping her mother cook after school, and about learning that kindness often mattered more than ingredients. Then her expression changed slightly. "She became ill when I was in my 20s. William remained silent. "After she passed away, those recipes were all I had left. Every meal I cook feels like carrying a small part of her forward." The room grew quiet. William looked out toward the gardens. "I understand that more than you realize." Emily knew he was speaking about Claire. She did not press for details. Some losses deserved respect rather than questions. Their conversation might have continued longer, but footsteps echoed from the hallway. Richard Bennett entered carrying a folder. The moment he noticed them sitting together, his expression tightened. "Mr. Anderson, the vendor contracts you requested are ready for review." William stood. "Thank you, Richard." As he left the room, Richard remained behind. For several seconds, neither he nor Emily spoke. Finally, he folded his arms. "You seem to have made quite an impression." Emily sensed the meaning beneath the words. "I am only here to work." Richard gave a polite smile that never reached his eyes. "Of course." Then he walked away. That evening, whispers spread quietly among certain members of the staff. Some wondered why William appeared increasingly interested in Emily's opinions. Others questioned whether she belonged in a household filled with executives, investors, and highly trained professionals. Emily remained unaware of most of the conversations. She spent her evening preparing meals, cleaning her station, and calling Lily during a break. Yet while she focused on her responsibilities, resistance was beginning to grow around her. And as William stood alone later that night reviewing business reports, he found himself thinking less about the billion-dollar decisions on his desk and more about the woman whose simple story somehow made the mansion feel a little less empty each day. 3 days later, the mansion was preparing for one of the most important private dinners of the year. Several influential business leaders would be attending, along with longtime partners and investors. The event was not only a social gathering, but an opportunity to strengthen relationships worth millions of dollars. Staff members moved quickly throughout the estate, checking details and reviewing schedules. In the kitchen, tension hung in the air. Richard Bennett stood at the center of the room reviewing the menu when William entered unexpectedly. "I would like Emily involved in tonight's dinner preparations," he said. The request immediately changed the atmosphere. Richard forced a professional smile. "Of course, sir. Although the menu has already been finalized." William glanced toward Emily. "Then perhaps she can contribute a dish." Richard hesitated for a fraction of a second. "As you wish." Once William left, the kitchen became unusually quiet. Emily sensed the attention focused on her, but continued working. She had never asked for special treatment. In fact, she would have been perfectly happy staying in the background. Later that afternoon, Richard approached her station. "If you are going to contribute, make it something simple," he said. "This is not the place for experiments." Emily nodded politely. "I understand." She chose a family recipe that had comforted generations of her family. It was not extravagant. It was not expensive, but it was prepared with care, patience, and attention to detail. As the evening approached, guests began arriving. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Elegant conversations filled the mansion. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath chandeliers. Everything appeared perfect. Yet Emily felt completely out of place among such wealth and influence. She remained focused on her work. During the dinner, course after course was served flawlessly. Compliments flowed toward the kitchen staff. Then Emily's dish reached the dining room. She did not expect anyone to notice. She certainly did not expect what happened next. One of the guests, a respected entrepreneur known for attending exclusive events around the world, paused after taking a bite. He looked down at the plate, then took another bite. Several people at the table noticed his reaction. "Who prepared this?" he asked. The room grew quiet. William set down his fork. "Why do you ask?" The guest smiled. "Because this is the first dish tonight that feels personal." A few others nodded in agreement. Another guest added, "It reminds me of family dinners when I was growing up." William's gaze shifted toward the kitchen doors. Meanwhile, Emily remained unaware of the conversation unfolding outside. She was cleaning her station when the house manager suddenly entered. "Mr. Anderson would like you in the dining room." Emily stared in surprise. "Now." Immediately, her heart began racing. She wiped her hands, straightened her apron, and followed the woman through the hallway. As she approached the dining room entrance, she could hear dozens of voices inside. Then the doors opened. Every guest turned toward her, and standing at the head of the table, William Anderson looked directly at her before saying words she never expected to hear in front of some of the most powerful people in the country. Emily stepped into the dining room feeling as though every eye in the mansion had suddenly focused on her. The elegant conversations faded into silence. Around the table sat executives, entrepreneurs, investors, and community leaders whose names often appeared in newspapers and business magazines. Emily wished she could disappear back into the kitchen. Instead, she stood quietly near the doorway and waited. William rose from his chair. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "the dish many of you have been asking about was prepared by Emily Carter." Several guests immediately turned toward her with interest. The entrepreneur who had first praised the meal smiled warmly. "Then I would like to personally thank you," he said. "That was one of the most memorable dishes I have enjoyed in years." Emily felt her cheeks grow warm. "Thank you," she replied softly. Another guest spoke next. "What restaurant do you own?" Emily blinked. "I do not own one." The guest looked genuinely surprised. "You should." A ripple of agreement moved around the table. For the first time in a very long while, Emily felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel. Pride. Not because wealthy people approved of her work, but because the lessons her mother had taught her were being appreciated by others. William watched the exchange carefully. He noticed that even now, Emily remained humble. She accepted every compliment graciously, but never tried to draw attention to herself. That quiet authenticity was becoming harder and harder to ignore. The evening continued, and eventually Emily returned to the kitchen. Yet the impact of that moment remained. Several guests stopped by before leaving to offer personal compliments. One requested her recipe. Another asked whether she catered private events. Opportunities Emily had never imagined suddenly seemed possible. But while encouraging conversations unfolded around her, something else was happening that she could not see. Richard Bennett stood near the back of the kitchen, observing everything. The praise directed toward Emily clearly troubled him. He had spent years building his reputation. Now a woman with no formal culinary title was receiving attention from some of the most influential guests who had ever entered the mansion. The following morning brought another surprise. Emily arrived for work and found a sealed envelope waiting on her station. Confused, she opened it. Inside was a handwritten note from one of the dinner guests. The man thanked her again for the meal and included an invitation to discuss a future culinary project. Emily read the note twice. Her hands trembled slightly. She had never received anything like it. Later that day, William encountered her in the hallway. "You seem distracted," he said. Emily showed him the note. William read it and smiled. "That is impressive." Emily shook her head in disbelief. "I never expected any of this." William looked at her thoughtfully. "Perhaps the problem is that you have spent too many years underestimating yourself." The words lingered in her mind long after he walked away. That evening, as Emily prepared to leave for home, her phone rang unexpectedly. The call came from Lily's school nurse. Emily's smile disappeared instantly. The nurse explained that Lily had been feeling unwell again and recommended further medical evaluation. Emily thanked her and ended the call, but concern immediately filled her heart. She grabbed her belongings and hurried toward the exit, unaware that William had seen the fear in her eyes and was about to learn a truth that would change everything. Emily drove straight from the mansion to pick up Lily. Throughout the entire trip, worry sat heavily on her mind. When she arrived at the clinic recommended by the school nurse, she listened carefully as the doctor explained that Lily's condition was not serious but would require additional tests and follow-up care over the next several months. The news brought relief, but it also brought a new challenge. Even with insurance, the medical expenses would place additional pressure on a budget that was already stretched thin. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Emily sat quietly at the kitchen table staring at a list of expected costs. She never complained. She never blamed anyone. She simply began calculating how many extra hours she might need to work. The following morning, she arrived at the mansion determined to keep moving forward. William immediately noticed the exhaustion in her eyes. During a break, he invited her into the study. "How is Lily?" he asked. Emily hesitated before explaining the situation. She spoke calmly, focusing on facts rather than emotions. When she finished, William remained silent for a moment. Then he said, "Something unexpected. You have spent weeks taking care of everyone around you. Who takes care of you?" Emily smiled softly. "That is not really how life works." William looked at her thoughtfully. "Perhaps it should." Over the next few days, Emily continued working, unaware that William had quietly arranged support through a charitable family foundation that specialized in helping children receive medical care. The assistance was provided anonymously. Emily never knew where it came from. She only knew that suddenly the financial burden became manageable. For the first time in months, she could breathe a little easier. Weeks passed. The invitation from the business leader led to another opportunity. Then another. Emily began receiving requests to cater small private gatherings. Her confidence slowly grew. One afternoon, William invited a group of close friends and staff members to a dinner at the mansion. It was far less formal than previous events. The atmosphere felt warm, almost like a family gathering. During the meal, William stood and raised a glass. The room grew quiet. He looked directly at Emily. "When she first arrived here, she believed she had very little to offer," he said. Emily immediately lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the attention. William continued, "What she did not realize is that she brought something this house had been missing for a very long time." Nobody spoke. She reminded us that kindness matters. That simple things matter. That people matter. Several guests nodded in agreement. Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. William smiled. "Money can buy almost anything, but it cannot buy sincerity, compassion, or the ability to make others feel at home." Those gifts came through that kitchen door all on their own. The room erupted into applause. Months later, Emily launched her own growing culinary business while continuing to spend time with Lily and pursuing opportunities she once believed were impossible. As for William, the mansion no longer felt quite so empty. Their lives had changed in different ways, but the lesson remained the same. Sometimes the greatest gift a person can offer is not wealth, influence, or power. Sometimes it is simply a good heart shared with others, and that gift can change lives far beyond what anyone imagined.